Lonely rancher bought a deaf girl sold by her drunk father, then realized she could hear his heartbeat. It was April 1887 in the lonely heart of Wyoming Territory. The wind of Red Creek carried dust, whispers, and memories no one dared to speak. The town stood small and tired, just a saloon, a few shacks, and a church bell that hadn't rung in months. Among the endless fields lived Eli Carter, a quiet rancher with kind eyes and a past that refused to fade. He had lost his wife and son to a storm 3 winters ago, and since then silence had been his only companion. But silence was about to change its meaning. One evening, outside the Red Creek saloon, he saw a drunk man shouting, his daughter trembling beside him. The man offered to sell her for a bottle of whiskey. The girl's eyes were full of fear, her lips unmoving. They said she was deaf. Eli didn't know then. She could hear everything, even his heart. The wind swept through Red Creek as Eli Carter tied his horse outside the saloon, dust curling around his boots like restless ghosts. He had come to town to sell cattle, nothing more. But fate had other plans waiting in the choking silence of that April afternoon. The sound of laughter spilled from the saloon, harsh, careless laughter that made him stop. A man stumbled onto the porch, bottle in hand, his voice slurred with drink and despair. Beside him stood a young girl, her face pale under the dirt, her hands trembling as if holding on to the last thread of hope. The crowd jeered, tossing coins, mocking the drunk who shouted that he'd sell his daughter for a price. Any price, even for another drink. Eli's chest tightened. It wasn't just pity. It was anger, the kind that burns cold and deep. He could see the girl's eyes, wide and still, as if the world had forgotten her. Her silence cut through the noise sharper than a blade. The man pushed her forward, demanding bids. No one moved, only laughter grew louder. Eli stepped closer, his voice calm but steady, offering a fair price without raising it twice. The drunk laughed, spat on the ground, and grabbed the coins with shaking fingers. The girl didn't move, didn't even breathe. When the man turned away, clutching his bottle, Eli looked at her and saw something no one else did. Fear mixed with quiet strength, the kind born from too much pain. He didn't touch her. He simply said, "You're safe now." But even his own voice felt strange in his throat. The walk back to the horse was long, the air heavy with stares. She followed without a sound, her steps light, almost ghost-like. On the ride home, the sunset bled across the horizon, painting the sky in red and gold. Eli glanced back once and found her watching the sky too, her eyes reflecting the same colors, distant yet alive. He tried to speak, to ask her name, but she turned her face away as if words had lost all meaning. He told himself she couldn't hear him anyway, that silence was her world now, but something about the way she moved, careful, aware, made him doubt it. By the time they reached the ranch, night had fallen, the moon silver over the plains. Eli opened the door to the small cabin, lit the lamp, and handed her a blanket. She took it gently, her hands shaking, then sat near the fire like someone afraid to be seen. He poured water, set bread on the table, and stepped outside, letting the cold air hit his face. He looked up at the stars and thought about how a single choice could change 2 lives. Behind him, the girl sat in silence, eyes on the flickering flame, her mind echoing with sounds she wasn't supposed to hear. Eli didn't know it yet, but the quietest girl in Red Creek carried the loudest secret the West had ever known. The nights at the ranch were long and quiet, filled with the sound of wind brushing against wooden walls and the low cry of coyotes in the distance. Lila moved through each day like a shadow, silent and careful, her bare feet barely touching the floorboards. Eli watched her from a distance, unsure how to reach the world behind her still eyes. He gave her small tasks, gentle ones, showing her how to feed the horses, how to pour grain without spilling, how to milk the cows as the first light touched the hills. She never spoke, never looked directly at him, but she listened with her hands, understanding every gesture he made. Sometimes he caught her tracing letters in the dirt with a stick, slow and hesitant. And when she wrote her name for the first time, Lila, he felt something stir inside him that he hadn't felt in years, a fragile hope that maybe silence didn't mean emptiness. Days passed, and the rhythm of the ranch became their unspoken language. Eli mended fences while she carried water, her dress catching the wind like a forgotten song. He believed she couldn't hear the world around her, so he spoke freely, his words falling into the air like prayers no one could answer. He told her about the storm that took his family, about the nights when loneliness felt heavier than stone, never expecting a reply. But one evening, as the sun sank low and painted everything gold, he heard a sound that froze him in place. It was soft, barely there, a trembling hum carried on the wind. He turned toward the barn, his heart pounding, and there she was, Lila, standing by the open door, her eyes closed, her lips moving in a faint melody. The sound was fragile but real, like a secret too scared to exist. For a moment he thought his mind was playing tricks, that the wind itself had learned to sing, But when she opened her eyes and saw him, the hum stopped instantly. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. She turned away quickly, her hands clutching the edge of her dress, fear flickering across her face. Eli said nothing, only watched as she walked back to the cabin, her steps hurried, her breath uneven. He wanted to believe it had been the wind, but he knew better. No deaf girl could hum to a tune she couldn't hear. That night he sat by the fire, the sound of her soft voice still echoing in his mind, and a question settled deep in his chest. Had she been pretending, or was there something darker she was hiding from him? Outside, the wind kept blowing, whispering through the empty fields, carrying with it a mystery that neither of them could yet name. The next morning, the air felt heavier, as if the land itself knew a secret waiting to be uncovered. Lila moved quietly around the yard, carrying a bucket of water toward the barn, her eyes lowered as always. Eli watched her from the porch, a question burning behind his calm expression. He had spent the night replaying that faint hum in his mind, convincing himself it had to be real. Now he needed to know. He picked up a metal bucket and walked toward the fence, pretending to tighten a loose wire while keeping her in sight. When she passed behind him, he let the bucket slip from his hand, letting it crash onto the hard ground with a sharp clang that broke the morning stillness. Lila froze. Her shoulders jerked. Her head turned. Her breath caught in fear. Eli felt his heart stop. It was quick. A reflex, something no deaf person could fake. She realized it too. Her eyes wide, her face pale as the truth hung in the space between them. Eli didn't speak. He just stared at her, seeing her differently for the first time. The silence that followed was colder than before. Filled with tension neither dared to break, Lila set the water down and turned away, walking back toward the cabin without a word. That evening the wind picked up, sweeping dust across the empty yard. Eli sat by the fire, his mind tangled in confusion and anger. He wasn't angry that she could hear. He was angry that she had lived in fear deep enough to hide it. When he stepped outside, the moon was high, casting silver light over the dry earth. Lila sat near the barn, her knees drawn to her chest, tracing lines in the dirt with a stick. Eli approached slowly, careful not to scare her. She didn't look up, but her hands moved with trembling urgency, shaping words in the dust. The firelight caught the letters. If they know I hear, they'll come back. Eli felt the words hit harder than any bullet. His voice caught as he asked softly, "Who will?" She didn't answer. Instead, she pressed her hand flat over the dirt, erasing the message as if the words themselves were dangerous. Her body shook, and tears fell silently down her cheeks. Eli crouched beside her, but before he could speak, she whispered something barely audible, her first word since the day they met. "Please." It was the smallest sound, yet it carried every bit of her fear. Eli felt a chill run through him, realizing this wasn't just a girl hiding from her father's cruelty. There was something else, something darker behind her silence, and whoever they were, they still lingered somewhere beyond the hills of Red Creek. The night closed around them, and for the first time, Eli understood that her secret wasn't only about hearing, it was about surviving. The night had been restless, the wind howling through the plains like a warning no one could understand. Eli barely slept, his thoughts circling around Lila's words, the fear behind her silence echoing louder than any sound. Before dawn, a distant rumble stirred him from bed. The low, steady thunder of horses. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, scanning the horizon where dust rose like smoke. Lila appeared at the door, her face pale, her eyes wide with the kind of fear that comes from memory, not surprise. "They found me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Moments later, 5 riders emerged from the ridge, led by the same man Eli had seen outside the saloon, the drunk father, now sober enough to look cruel. The others were bounty hunters, armed and ready. "You've got something that belongs to me," the man shouted, grinning through yellowed teeth. Eli didn't move. The sun had barely risen, yet the light already glinted off the barrels of their guns. Behind him, Lila trembled, her breath uneven. The men rode closer, circling the yard, and without warning, one tossed a flaming bottle toward the barn. Fire exploded across the dry wood, crackling loud and fast, filling the air with smoke and heat. Eli felt rage surge through him, a force stronger than fear. He stepped forward, raising his rifle, his hand steady but his heart pounding hard enough to shake his bones. "You'll leave now," he said, voice calm but fierce. The father laughed, dismounting his horse. "She's worth more than you think," he sneered. "People want her alive. The girl can hear things others can't. She's a gift." Eli didn't understand, but the way the man said it made his blood run cold. Lila took a step back, tears streaming down her face as the flames grew behind her, lighting her in shades of gold and red. The men moved closer, their shadows long and cruel against the fire. Eli cocked his rifle, his voice low. "You'll have to go through me first." The standoff felt endless. the only sounds the crackle of burning wood and the restless snort of horses. Then one of the men raised his gun, and before Eli could react, Lila screamed. It wasn't a cry of fear. It was pure, raw, and piercing, a sound that split the air like lightning. The horses reared, the men froze, and even the fire seemed to hesitate. The scream echoed across the open land, rolling over the hills until it vanished into the wind. Eli turned toward her, stunned, the world holding its breath. In that moment, the truth of her pain became sound. Every wound, every secret, every night she had stayed silent now, unleashed in one cry that made the desert itself go still. The men looked shaken as if they'd heard something not meant for mortal ears. For the first time, silence was her weapon, and sound was her freedom. The men fled into the darkness, their courage broken by a sound they couldn't understand, leaving only smoke, ashes, and the heavy breath of silence behind. Eli dropped his rifle and ran to Lila, pulling her close as the fire crackled around them, his voice shaking as he told her it was over. She clung to him, trembling, the weight of years of fear pouring out in tears she could no longer hide. When the flames died and the stars returned, she finally spoke the truth she had buried too deep. She said she had learned to act deaf because every sound once brought pain. Her father's shouting, the crack of a belt, the world that never showed mercy. But now when Eli spoke, she heard calm instead of chaos, warmth instead of fear. Days later, rain came to Red Creek, soft and endless. Lila stood beneath the roof, eyes closed, listening. The sound she once feared had become the song of her freedom.